It's about what you know. It's about where you go. If you really want to know, it's the Leo Larry Show. It's about what you know. It's about where you go. If you really want to know, it's the Leo Larry Show.
Hi, I'm Leo.
And I'm Larry.
And welcome to the Leo and Larry Show, where we talk about a variety of issues that are interesting to you and that can help you know more and to go more positive places. How you been doing, Larry?
I'm well. How's your week been?
And it's
heard
great.
You did some travel.
Yeah, great, fantastic. Been to the nation capital, visited the National African American Museum, recommended to everybody. And it just, basically deals with a whole lot of issues, just like we're doing today.
But I asked you about that because I was there a week before you were there. I was there 4th of July weekend. And I asked my wife on the way back, because I took two of my grandkids there. And I asked my wife, does it seem like to you that it's been kind of diluted?
Absolutely.
That it's kind of been made palatable to other people. And because that's kind of, it's got great exhibits. It's an amazing, man. Matter of fact, I went twice when I was there, 4th of July weekend, which was about a little bit more than a week ago. And I was impressed with the exhibits. The exhibits were amazing. But I couldn't help come away thinking, it seems like it's been bleached, especially when I went into the gift shop. I don't know if you had a chance to go into the gift shop.
Didn't get a chance to go.
I went into the gift shop. We did the first 4 floors, the top 4 floors, the first trip and the first day. And then we came back the next day and we did the from 1400 to present, which was in the basement. And the exhibits were, like I said, absolutely amazing. Just for somebody to compile that much information into one place about the African American experience is amazing. I look forward to what's going to happen in Charleston, South Carolina, with the International African American Museum that's being built down there. That I think it's the first of next year.
Right.
So I was excited and I was absolutely excited because I had my 12-year-old grandson and my 15-year-old granddaughter, and they got to share that experience with us. But it is, to me, it seemed like, and I know my young kids are not going to understand what you and I are talking about when we talk about being bleached. And not going into the kind of detail that we would like to see them go into in talking about the African American experience. And so we hopefully, it works out. And there were probably as many white folk at the museum.
Oh, absolutely.
As there were, if not more, in some cases.
One day, more when I was
than there were black folk at the museum. But the experience, and it's taken me. It's been over 3 years now, over 3 years. It's taken me that long to actually get there to see it. What do you think?
That was my second visit. And I think what would be really great if they had like a lecture series or something so that they can show the connectiveness of us, of our experience in being in the United States of America. So for example, if you want to talk about Black nationalism, the connection between Martin Delany, who is often left out. We hear about Frederick Douglass all the time in his newspaper, the North Star, but people don't realize that half of that paper was owned by Martin Delany. And so the connectiveness between a Martin Delany and a Bishop Henry McNeil Turner, and connecting to J.A. Rogers and Marcus Garvey and others, till we get up to today when, we had the nationalists, Dr. Ron Karenga, who came up with the concept of Kwanzaa to, Elijah Muhammad and Farrakhan and others today. And so that's what I found, that there were amazing exhibits, but you didn't see the connectiveness. You didn't see how during our American experience, how we evolve, but how we maintain some basic tenets even to today. And that's what you're saying is true. That's important because those are the roots that help to nourish us as a people, so we continue to strive to survive and even to thrive under these very oppressive conditions.
Well, and I think we're for me the missing link is that when you look at the revolutionaries that were in our community, the Malcolms, the Garveys, the Black Panther Party and people like that, I didn't see that link. I did, and maybe I missed it, but I didn't see that link. I didn't see the fact that there were two sides to that story. There was Martin Luther King's side to that story, and then there was Malcolm X's side to that story. And both of those fed on each other to make the progress, the little progress that we made in this country. They actually fed on each other to make that progress. And we need to acknowledge that. And also we need to acknowledge the authenticity of our leaders. And when I say authenticity, I mean, Martin died poor. Malcolm died without even owning the house. And so this whole idea of building wealth through climbing on the backs of Blacks and poor people, as we have today, is a challenge. And it's a challenge for me, because I see so many gullible Black folk buying into the propaganda that I'm going to set you free, but first let me go out and buy this Mercedes,
Right.
or let me buy this house in Charleston, or let me do whatever I need to do for me and my family, and then I'll get back to you. And that's a challenge for me, because I go back and I listen to Gil Scott-Heron, and I listen to some of these guys who talked about the revolution and the revolution not being televised. And I actually, when I look back in perspective, I find that Gil Scott was wrong. The revolution is being televised. Nobody's listening. It's not that it's not being televised. It's being televised every day. But we're so quick to believe. And this is one of the reasons why Trump was able to beat Hillary in 2016. Because we are so easily to believe whatever propaganda or whatever slander is thrown out there. Black folk didn't turn out in massive number for Hillary because Trump had labeled her a crook and said that she needed to be locked up. And so people stopped listening to her message and start listening to what Trump and the Republican Party was saying about her on Facebook and on social media and other media outlets. And the challenge came out that they stayed home. They didn't turn out in the numbers that they turned out for Barack Obama. They turned out in a much lower number. Barack Obama, I think, had a personal agenda, so he didn't pretty much push it as hard as he could have pushed it either. Because he was, at the end of the day, I don't think he was very fond of Hillary either.
No, he was,
and I know his handlers were.
He was more center right than progressive. And you raised a couple of good points, and that actually we could see in Florence and we could see throughout the country. And one is, and I remember my father saying this, he said, they don't kill leaders anymore because they figured out that if you assassinate a bona fide leader, that person doesn't really die, they become a martyr, and they always have followers. So he said what they have perfected is the art of slandering leaders, because people are not perceptive enough to say, well, these ideas were great, these accomplishments were successful, but instead they tend to throw out everything that individual is about. And he would say, rather than martyrdom, that it's about slander and discrediting people now.
And,
That's
and
what,
if you add to slander and discrediting and buying,
mhm,
then you have the full force that at some of these Black leaders, Jesse Jackson, for instance, at their peak, they were taking in $80–90 million a year
mhm,
in revenue. Who were they getting this money from? They were getting this money from corporate America. There's a discussion at some point where Jesse Jackson was in a meeting and Augustus Coors, who owned I mean, not Augustus Coors, August Bush, who owns
of course.
who owns the Bush Brewery,
Mhm,
who did own the Bush Brewery. They sold it recently in the last few years. But they say they sitting around there talking about what would happen to Jesse's family
mhm,
if Jesse was no longer here,
mhm,
because Jesse wasn't technically supposed to be a rich man himself. So
mhm.
what would happen to Jesse's family? And so they came up with a plan in a room that said, we're going to give Jesse's son a distributorship, a Budweiser distributorship.
Mhm.
And they did in Detroit give Jesse Jackson's son in Chicago, I'm sorry, they gave him a distributorship, which means that the family is going to be financially secure for the rest of their life. And so it's a situation where Reverend Woodbury and Leo, it's a situation where we don't know who our friends and who our enemies are.
Mhm,
We used to be able to judge them by color.
mhm,
And then Martin Luther King came up with this content of character thing. And so we start to try to judge people by the content of their character. But we are finding that in our community, in Florence, in South Carolina, and across the nation, that some of these people have no character. Some of these people just basically are spending their time, their energy, and their resources trying to control the Black masses so that the Black masses don't make a move
mhm,
towards progress. I mean, we look at Florence as a classic example. There's a discussion, and I had this discussion with someone earlier this morning that said, look, how do you live in a community? And you and I live in this community where for 50 years, Northeast Florence and Florence has not seen any investment, any major investment by the city of by the city of Florence.
no community development.
No community development. Their idea of community development is to throw add some addition to the park.
Mhm,
What I call the equivalent of putting a Band-Aid on cancer.
mhm,
And so they have not went into our communities and said, okay, how can I make life better for you? Not just safer, which they're doing a poor job of because we have so many shootings every weekend. So they're doing a terrible job of that. Not just from a standpoint of being safer, but how can I make the community better for you in terms of your development and from an economic standpoint and from a social standpoint? How can I make this community better for you? Am I creating the kind of jobs in this community that are going to move this community forward? Am I creating the kinds of social atmosphere in this community that's going to move this community forward? Or am I just basically, as I said a second ago, putting a Band-Aid on the cancer
mhm,
and saying, okay, we will invest in the community? And, you know, the city of Florence, like the city of Darlington, like the city of Hartsville, the city of Marion, and Lake City, and all the others, get community block grant money.
mhm.
What are they doing with this money?
Right.
I mean, other than building parks and splash pools and things like that. The question becomes, what are they doing with this money and how they're using government money
Mhm,
to move this community forward? I mean, the last business that came in here, the chicken plant, let's be fair.
minimal wage
That's about as minimum wage as you can get.
and dangerous.
And I
unhealthy.
lived before, but I was in Columbia. I lived about less than a mile away from the company that actually is bringing this plant in
Mhm,
over in West Columbia. And I saw every day when those people got off from work, you know, how challenged they seemed when they got off from work, when they were coming out of that plant at 4 o'clock in the evening or 5 o'clock in the evening. And you're looking at them and they look like they were beat down.
mhm,
And you're saying that This is your idea of economic development?
Mhm. Well, see, you said your idea, and you talked about leadership, and so I did a piece years ago, and it actually ran in the community time. Was called the Crisis of Black Leadership. And when you look at past leadership, authentic leadership, the kind of true leadership that changed the conditions in our communities and the plight of Black people in general, and actually changed what went on in America and was a model for other countries to implement, because they saw the success and the progress in human rights, etc. When you look at that, you talk about Malcolm and you talked about Martin, and what you see is today is you see people who are leaders because of who they are connected to in terms of genetics and DNA, right? You have people who are leaders because they happen to be employed somewhere. We look at people who are leaders because of their celebrity status, but true leaders have a vision, and not just a general vision, but they have a platform, they have a strategy, they have a plan, they have specific long range and expansive goals that they want to be able to accomplish. And in addition to having a platform, program, vision, they have an actual following in the community. So you don't get people running for office that never ran an organization, never ran a business, never had governmental experience, and don't have a following in the community. And you run for office and you wind up with 100, 200, 300 votes. So, true leaders have support in the community. They have support from the community. They have programs, they have platforms, they have a vision and a roadmap. How do we get to where we're going? And when you don't have leaders who have those things and aren't interested in gaining that kind of knowledge and expertise, then you wind up with people who really aren't going to do anything because they have no plan or any vision. And that's what we see a lot of in Florence and across this country. You could actually sit down and ask people, and I've done this, people running for office say, what's your platform? And they have none. You know what I mean? Just a generality. Teachers should make more money. We should do something about crime. Those are not platforms. Those are statements.
Well, I agree with you. And Harry Belafonte said it a long time ago, and I respect him, the statement that he made. And the statement was basically this: we have a lot of people that are elected to office, and they elected to office with the understanding that they are going to implement change, that their job and their role is to implement change. And they get there and they realize that in order for me to stay here, I'm going to have to raise a lot of money to be reelected. And so now the issue of change becomes secondary to the issue of getting reelected. Because now it's more important to be reelected. It's more important to keep the job than it is to do the job. And so I think we run into a lot of that. And that's also we run into a leadership in our community today that is selfish. And I say selfish in the sense that they are looking at the material benefits of being in office. They are looking at what kind of car will I drive? What kind of house will I live in? What kind of clothes will I be able to wear? They're looking at the materialistic standpoint, and they're willing, in many cases, not just in some, but in many cases, they're willing to sell their soul for the opportunity to have the good life, even though they were elected to advocate for those people who don't have the good life and who may never be able to achieve a good life. And so it's kind of a situation that amazes me that I choose, as a publisher, as an African American publisher who's been publishing for 40 years, I choose my community over anything else,
mhm,
over possible advertisers, over possible opportunities that I could have had in the community that would have made me a lot better off than I am
mhm,
financially today, because I believe that I'm guided by God. Now, these people that are selling us down the river, as Tracy Chapman would say, are selling, are selling us down the river. I don't know who they got it.
mhm, mhm. Absolutely. And I'm at the same place that you are. I've been offered other opportunities in other places. I've been offered salaries that you know make what we make here. But you moved here. I moved here roughly 35 years ago, and we moved here with the intention of helping people and helping communities. And so, so how do we do that? Because I'm a great believer that every great movement, every great monument of change that is taking place everywhere on this planet does not happen without including the masses of people. And when someone's elected to office, they're actually elected to represent the people in their district or in their city, and to represent those needs, and to make sure that they at least make an effort to try to deal with those needs. And so we just don't see a lot of that, not only here in Florence, but across the country. And so the thing that I found is that when everyday people are educated on an issue, then they will deal with that issue. And so what you talked about in terms of people don't know that they're not getting the information through the channels that most people access. I mean, if you look at ETV, if you listen to National Public Radio, if you go to C-SPAN, book notes, that kind of stuff, oh, you'll learn a lot. But you're not going to learn a lot on your local stations. You're not going to learn a lot in the majority newspapers about what's going on in your community and opportunities. And so it's very important that we educate people about what's going on. And that's why I really I'm excited about this show, the Leo and Larry show, and talking about some of the things we need to do. So one thing is we need to grow leaders. We need to educate leaders. And you and I often talk about the fact that as teenagers, we learned about our history. We learned about a lot of things. We learned about politics, how change happens. And we have to start cultivating people like that and making sure that people have experience, that they have experience in actually being a part of making change and learning about that. And so, I often think about, do we need to set up a school or classes or something like that? Because, during the civil rights movement, you had your freedom schools. During the Black Power movement, you had your liberation schools. Up until today, we had places where you could go to a church or an organization and learn about things, you know what I mean? So, I mean, I was a teenager and I was learning about what was going on in China. I knew who Patrice Lumumba was in the Congo, you know what I mean? And you don't have that sort of cultivation of leaders that you do today. Basically people go down, pay their money, file, and say, hey, guess what? I'm running.
Well, here's the thing, Leo. The thing is, you're absolutely right. We need an academy.
Mhm,
And it's ironic because in South Carolina, there's a conservative academy up in I think it's in Greenville, Spartanburg, the Hain Institute, that does that to integrate and teach our children, Black children especially, how to mix in, how to blend in, and how to be, in their minds, perfect citizens.
mhm,
That's a conservative student, Congressman Clyburn. has has another organization that does something from a moderate standpoint to do the exact same thing: how to mix in, how to fit in, how to be palatable to the system. And they're training our kids, as Malcolm once said, you know, when you're cut, you don't see the blood. You don't you and so we need to have something that offsets that, and an academy. And then one of the things that I talked about bringing here is a thing called the Kemet Academy, which would do something similar to that. And I've got some really interesting ideas about how to implement that program, and where to find the young leadership, because the biggest challenge is finding young leadership. I know where to find a young leadership. I'm not going to share it on this show, because I know that people who don't agree with me are watching the show, listening to the show. And you and I talked to a brother a couple of days ago, Mustafa, from, he used to be the NAACP president down in Conway, and he and I were talking about how to address that issue. And I gave him the actual solution to how to address that issue. Because when I was in Washington, when I was at the Civil Rights Museum, I actually figured this out, that there is a real solution to how we can solve this problem and get young people back involved in the fray. And a Saturday academy of some kind would be an excellent starting point, as you said, for us doing that. You can have it as your church here. But the whole idea basically is to have to orientate young people on not just the way they should go, but how they can get there.
How they can get there.
And have them understand, as I try to make my 12-year-old grandson understand, that he wants to be a millionaire one day. He wants to be a billionaire one day. He says, well, Grandpa, I'm going to be a billionaire. I'm like, okay, what's your plan? And so helping them to implement their plan, helping them to implement their strategy, helping them to identify opportunities for them to serve in the community. Clemson just partnered with Benedict College, Claflin, Morris, and Morris, Francis Marion, and a couple of other colleges, with a $2.7 million grant to have them provide young people at these college levels in emergency situations. Now, when I read the news release on this, there was absolutely no money in this grant for the kids. There was $2.7 million in it, and all it went to Clemson, and I assume they shared a little bit with Benedict and with Claflin and with the others. But there was no money in this grant for the kids to say, okay, if I'm going to be on hold to look out during an emergency situation, what kind of compensation are you giving me? They made the kids volunteers. And so many times we see, Reverend Woodbury, we see the channels being changed in a situation where once you were paying for these services, and now you decided that in what you think of as a free society, you shouldn't pay for it. So when you look at the leadership of organizations that are serving the African American community, ask yourself, how many of those organizations in Florence and across the state of South Carolina that you see, and you deal with them all day, every day, especially nonprofits, how many of them are headed by Black people? How many of them are actually headed by Black people?
Not that many.
And it seems to be moving faster and faster. And I looked at some of these organizations in the last few days, in the last few weeks, and some of them, the top 10 leaders in the organization are people who are supposed to be serving the Black community, but they are not Black at all. They don't have the Black experience. I was looking at a picture yesterday where this Black guy was speaking to a group of people about a health issue in the African American community, and he was a Black guy doing the speaking, but everybody in the room was white.
Oh yeah. And what happens is, I'll tell you, in part, that's because, and I'm going to talk about it from a nonprofit perspective. Work gets done in the community, down on the ground, right? Just like we know everybody in America, rich or poor, if your child can eat breakfast in school. And we know that started with the Black Panther Party,
Exactly.
Young Lords, senior citizens, voluntary. People do work on the ground, they address issues, they get successes. And it happens and it blossoms, and then everybody decides we need to take this on. Good example is environmental justice, right? So now you have corporations like Duke that have principles of environmental justice, or so you have state agencies, South Carolina DHEC, and others that have environmental justice hubs or committees. You have in Virginia, you have advisory groups on environmental justice. You even have President Biden, who came out with one of his executive orders that addresses environmental justice. We do the work, or as a friend of mine, got to give a shout out to Rufus Moses over in Maryland. Let me attribute it to him. He said one time, we break the ice, and then after we break the ice, everybody shoves us aside and goes fishing. And so you look at environmental justice now, it is a multi-million-dollar or billion-dollar financial issue in this country. But environmental justice, the term itself started with Black people in Warren County, North Carolina. And so what we do is we don't follow the pathway. We literally let people talk us into believing that we are not the experts, that this person with a degree, this white person, this larger organization, this scientist who does research is more of an expert on you around an issue that happens in your community daily. That you're the true expert. And so that's what happens with us. And we just continue to believe that other people's ice is colder than ours. And so
I'm not sure it's in other people's ice that's colder than ours. Leo, I think to a large extent, we don't pool our resources.
Oh, absolutely.
In our community.
That's a whole other thing.
We don't pool our resources to combat these issues. So we end up consistently going to these other people and asking them for the resources to manage the program that we want to manage in our community, that we know need managing in our community. And so nothing is given free. If I'm going to give you my money, you're going to have to take some direction that looks familiar to me or feels comfortable for me. And so at the end of the day, we lose control over the programs and the activities, whether it's feeding kids for breakfast, or whether it's feeding them for lunch, or whether it's making sure that they have after school programs that work for the community as a whole. If we're not funding these things, and I think that's where the Black community falls short in their involvement in this process, is if you got to ask somebody for funding, you got to bend to pretty much their will. If you don't have to ask anybody for funding, if you can say, okay, we can run after school program at this church without having federal, state, or local funding, then you're going to be better off. The kids are going to be better off because you're not going to have to bend to anybody's will. In case you need to discipline them in a distinct way, you have that opportunity. In case you want to set the hours in a different way, you have that opportunity. In case you want to use transportation to bring them to, you have that opportunity. Too many times, Black folk lend themselves to outside people because they're either, and I won't call it lazy, they don't take the time to develop the resources in that community. We have churches that raise millions of dollars every week. We have other organizations, the Divine Nine, who raise millions of dollars a year for programs in our community. So there is no shortage of resources in our community. There's a shortage of investment in our community. we're not investing back into our community.
We don't want to fund our own
And
freedom.
and
It's okay.
if you're gonna be free, you're gonna have to
You have
fund
to fund
your own freedom. I agree with you 1,000%.
And see, the same thing happens with businesses. And we have a lot of people in the African American community who show hostility to immigrants who come in and own businesses. Well, this is not anything new. Growing up as a child in Brooklyn, most of the businesses, the grocery stores, the small grocery stores, the candy stores, the fruits and vegetable stands, they were owned primarily by Eastern European Jews, and then they left. Everyone uses our community as a springboard to move up to another economic level. And so we look at it and we see Asians, Koreans, Chinese, we see Indians, we see Pakistanis. We even see in some communities, we see Jamaicans and Haitians and people who speak Spanish languages, Mexican or Puerto Rican. And so what we don't realize is that people actually look at the financial business, the economic shortcomings in our communities, vacuums, and they just step into them. Because I often say to people, I've been blessed to visit, many places in this country. And usually when you see a business owned by an immigrant, they did not construct a commercial building from the ground up. They just move into vacant businesses that are boarded up in our community.
And sometimes they buy them.
And they buy them sometimes.
And that's why I'm personally so proud of Larry Ellaby and Northside Seafood.
He's been there a long time.
But he made the commitment to be there. He's the only real African American business in that block, in that stretch of Oakland Avenue. There are 3 convenience stores, I think, at least 3 convenience stores in that area, and all of them are owned by people outside of our community.
Right.
And Larry has made the commitment to be there and to deal with the challenges of being a businessman in a challenging community, in an underserved community. And I'm sure there are many. And so I want to make sure we get a shout out to him and what he's been able to do and make it in terms of making investment in that particular community. And you're absolutely right. The challenge basically is what would happen if we would own those 3 stores We would employ more black folks. We would create a personal wealth for ourselves. We would be able to invest in the politicians and the leadership in that community if we own the businesses in our community. It's just that simple. Maybe 10 years ago, 5 or 10 years ago, I can't remember exactly what it was, before Dollar General and before the 2 service stations down in Savannah Grove, I went to my 2 sons and I said, look, let's open a convenience store in Savannah Grove. They said, well, okay, Dad, we can do that. And we got a liquor license, we got the beer and wine license, we got all the things that we needed to do. And as right as we were getting ready to open the store, my son said, well, who's gonna work the store, Dad? Because I got a job, and my brother got a job, and I said, well, I'm not working it. And so we ended up canceling the project. I had invested about several $1,000s in the project, and I pulled back because I had nobody to work the store that I could be dependable. So the other thing is getting staffing. Yeah, and staffing is a tremendous challenge right now. But getting staffing and getting people to buy into your legacy.
Right.
Our legacy is not to be workers. Our legacy is to be entrepreneurs. And we have to remember
and a family legacy.
And especially our family legacy. And everybody can't be those things. Some people are going to have to work in a manufacturing facility or some other type of facility. And I understand that. But those who can should. And the reality of our community is we're going to be better off as a community when I can buy my furniture from a black man, when I can buy my house from a black woman, when I can buy my car from someone who looks like me, we're going to be better off because right now we are the greatest consumer that America's ever known, and we consume just for the interest of consuming. We don't care whether I need a new car or not. I saw that new car over there,
and I want it.
And so we consume just for the, how many televisions do you have in your house? How many televisions do I have in my house? I've got probably 4 or 5. I live in a 3-bedroom house. And so the point basically is, why do we have all of this stuff? Because we sit around and we look at our bank account and we got a couple of dollars. I'm going out and buy something. And instead of saying, a good idea would be, what organization in the community can I invest in that's going to help move the community forward?
Right. And you're keeping money in the community. So instead of these conversations we have about how many times a dollar goes around in the white community, the Asian community, the brown community, you're actually doing it instead of talking about it. Because if you buy that furniture set from a black entrepreneur, some of that money is going to say, because more than likely they belong to a black church in the community, and they'll be tithing there, giving their offerings there. Got to start first there. They'll also, when they go to get their hair cut, when the females in the house go to get their hair done, more than likely they're going to be going to a black-owned beauty salon or barber shop. This is how we do it. And then what we also don't understand is what Claude Anderson talked about, is that there is an unofficial boycott on black-owned businesses. On a Sunday, any day of the week, you will see black people in masses in restaurants owned by other people. But when do you go to a black-owned restaurant and you see the place filled with Asians or Indians or Pakistanis or even white people? There's an unofficial boycott on our community, and we are super consumers who, rather than investing in our own community, are consistently investing our wealth in other people's communities who will not even reciprocate us. And that's a real problem. That's something that people should be looking at.
The question I asked in that situation, though, is it intentional? It looks intentional. It feels intentional, but is it intentional? Or white folk just more comfortable being in environments? I look at,
of course,
I look at the Chick-fil-A situation. Every time I go by Chick-fil-A, the lines around the corner of the floor. And I'm saying, I have Chick-fil-A from time to time, and there's nothing special about that chicken. But there's a double line out at Magnolia Mall all day, every day, going to Chick-fil-A. And I was over there about dinner time a week or so ago, and by there, and we were going to go to Chick-fil-A, and we looked at the line and said, "Oh no, we got to go to Burger King," because it was just that simple. So there is a natural instinct, I believe, between white folk to support their own, and I think where black folk are confused is that while white folk are supporting their own and doing business with the people they feel comfortable doing business with, black folk want to be so much like them till they assimilate, till they say, okay, I don't care about Chick-fil-A's reputation as one of the strongest conservative organizations, supporting some of the strongest conservative organizations in the country. I don't care about that history. I care about they got good chicken, or that I see a lot of white people there, so it must be good.
Must be good food.
So it must be good. And so they don't make the comparison. I got a brother up in Maryland that comes down here, several times a year, and he goes to Maurice Messenger's in Columbia. And I said, and I've been telling them for years, I've said, man, you know, we don't go to Maurice's. And he said, well, man, I love their barbecue. And my wife and my family, my kids, when we come down here, got 2 daughters, and we come down, we go on to Maurice's. And they do every time they come. And so my thing, and I said, you know, if that's your choice, that's your choice. That's not my choice. I'm going to respect the NAACP's boycott that has been in place for 15, 20 years. I'm going to respect that. But a lot of time, Black folk, there's a Schoolhouse restaurant over in Stratton. There was a posting on Facebook the other day to this Black church said we were doing a fundraiser for the church, and we went to Schoolhouse Barbecue over in Stratton, Schoolhouse, whatever it is, I don't know what it's a barbecue restaurant, but and they showed a plate of food, and they said we had a great family time at that Schoolhouse restaurant over in Scranton. And I'm going, but you couldn't, because I thought when I first saw it, I thought, well, maybe it's Smoky, Holy Smokes, maybe it's Holy Smokes. And when I read it, I said, oh, no, it's not Holy Smokes. It's not a Black-owned restaurant. And we don't understand the relevance or the importance of supporting our own businesses. We do like somebody told me about a politician a while ago. It said, I don't like them. And we do that with people with restaurants. I don't like that person. I don't like that person. That person owns dry cleaners. That person owns some type of business in our community. And people will go and say, well, I don't really like them. And it's not a question of whether you like them. If the food at the restaurant is quality food, if the service at the other business is quality service, why wouldn't you use them anyhow?
Yeah,
and even if the cost is slightly higher, why would you use them anyhow?
Right, and then there's some things that make people feel comfortable. So if I'm white and part of my cultural orientations, I like country Western music, and I go into a Black business, I'm listening to Biggie Smalls, I may not feel comfortable in that element. And I'll give you an example. There's an Asian restaurant here in Florence that every time I've been there, the majority of the customers are Black. Now, when I walk in there, I'm listening to Black music. I walk in there, they're playing Mary J. Blige and the kind of stuff that have people who are Black, have them feeling comfortable and at home. And so, you know, part of knowing how to market your business is dealing with things like that, so that, you know, whoever comes in, if you want to draw more white customers or you want to draw more Latinx customers, you know, then you have to create the kind of multicultural atmosphere that makes everybody feel comfortable when they come in there. So that's a part of it. But again, like you were saying, you know, it shouldn't be this dislike thing, that we do more with people who live in our communities than people outside. Because I've been in convenience stores where they're cursing out the people in the convenience store. I can't stand you, Habib. Why don't you go back to the Middle East? But the next day they're back in the store. But if that were a Black person, they would say, I'm never buying anything from them again.
Well, the question becomes at this particular point, how good a businessman? So there's a learning curve. I've been in business 40 years. There's a learning curve. You've been in your organization for almost 40 years, you understand. There is a learning curve. I didn't come into this business knowing everything I needed to know about this business. Not. As much as I studied, I spent a year.
It's still on the curve.
I spent a year before researching my business before I went into my business. I was at Thomas Cooper Library at the University of South Carolina. Every day when my friends wanted to find me, they came to Thomas Cooper Library because they knew that's where I was researching the opportunity to go into business. And I learned a lot, but I didn't learn nearly enough. And I think that's where we have to, because I can prepare the best barbecue you ever had. doesn't make me a good businessman. Because I can prepare the best collard greens and cornbread that you ever had, doesn't make me a good businessman. I have got to, and if I don't have the personality to be a people person, which is what you're going to be if you're running a business. You're going to be a people person. If I don't have the personality to be a people person, I need to have the sense to hire somebody or bring somebody forward, whether it's my wife or whether it's somebody from the outside. I need that who's a people person who can deal with the issues and the concerns of the customers as they come in and address them in a positive way and make that customer feel satisfied that the solutions to that problem are going to be taken care of. So many times you have a person like, they just want to raise hell about something. And sometimes they do, but they're the customer.
Right.
So if they want to raise hell about something, you got to patronize them and you got to let them raise hell about that. Let them get it off their chest. There was a lady over in Darlington with a restaurant and we were talking a few months ago about her situation. And she said, well, the person was saying, well, they didn't like the idea of the food was such and such and they didn't like it. And she said, well, they argued for a while. I said, and I'm thinking to myself, why were you arguing with the person? Just give the person the meal free.
All right.
And move on.
Well, see, we come from a different school. So, and you hear people say this daily, whether they were in business or not. The customer is always right.
Absolutely.
I worked, when I was in my 20s, I worked at a restaurant up in Harlem. And we said that all the time. We said, the customer is always right until they walk out the door. Then we'll talk trash about them. But no, we're not going to argue with the customer. We're not going to dispute anything with the customer. If we don't have customers coming in regularly, we have no salary and the owner has no business. But I want to point out one thing is that all the stuff we talk about from Black leadership, elected officials, how we conduct business, how we address problems in our community, the one point of commonality throughout our entire discussion is planning. And, we look at the conservative movement in the United States, and if you're a student of history, you know that they started planning and working on what they were doing in the late 40s, in the early 50s, continued into the 60s. Barry Goldwater, the first Republican candidate for president who declared himself a conservative. And so we have no short-term plans or strategy, much less long-term planning and strategy. And we one of the things we shared with the Florence City Council, and this was over a year ago, maybe close to 2 years, we want to share with them what we call our community, economic, and environmental development plan. And for those who live in Florence, they already know the environmental piece. Yes, we've been working on that. Donated 100 trees that got planted in the city. The Sustainability and Resilience Advisory Board, we had a large part in doing that. The hydro panels, things like that. Now we're moving into the economic piece, but you got to have plan and you got to have strategic long-term planning. So we talked about the school. How do we make sure that there are jobs, not at the chicken plant, but there are jobs for the 21st century, that we have a trained, skilled labor pool that knows how to do things around automation, internet technology, robotics, all of these things for the future, And if we don't have a plan to lift our people up in terms of job skills and training and education, we're never going to get there. And so all of the things, that's the one point that stood out to me, Larry, that we keep talking about the fact that we don't have any real planning, whether it's to educate future leaders, et cetera. We have no plans. We're just bouncing from one thing to another, tossed to and fro on every wind of doctrine.
Two things. One, I was reading before I came in for this show, a Fitz News article For you who don't know, fits.com is a conservative website in South Carolina. And they were talking about how the Department of Education in the state of South Carolina has $2 billion plus the 500 million that I know of in unused funds that they will have for this year.
Wow.
That they had not allotted for this year.
2.5 billion.
2.5 billion. Now here's the challenge. Here's the interesting thing that happens. Google is in Charleston. Amazon is in Columbia. Facebook is in the state. So we have all these technology companies that are in the state of South Carolina. Why can't we take some of that $2.5 billion and send those who can be trained to some type of program that trains them to be able to work for Google or to work for Facebook or to work for Amazon and to work for technology companies that are going to be the cutting edge. You know, I saw an argument yesterday that was very, very interesting. And the argument was because I was concerned about AI. Artificial intelligence. And I was concerned about AI, and I was especially concerned about the progress of AI, not in South Carolina, but across the nation and across the world, actually. And I realized something, that even though AI, Apple and Google and who knows else has perfected AI, there's one problem with AI that we hadn't thought about.
What's that?
Insurance. If you're going to drive an autonomous car and that car wrecks, who could be responsible for it? Technically, an autonomous car has no steering wheel, has no brakes that you can do yourself. You basically just a victim in that car. You're just riding in that car, and that car is taking you wherever you said for it to take you. But you have no control of this car at all. So, do I sue you when this car runs over my kid or runs over my cat or whatever? Or do I sue the car manufacturer? Do I sue the software company that created it? Who is getting sued? Congress hasn't prepared for AI.
Right.
So that there is really nothing that you can do, even though AI is here technically. Congress has absolutely no opportunity. Congress has absolutely no opportunity to say what AI is. So there's going to have to be an overhaul of internet, social media, and online rules and laws.
Bitcoin is another one.
Cash
apps, etc. Where Congress is behind trying to figure out how do we regulate these things. You know what I mean?
My position on Bitcoin is fairly simple. It's simply Bitcoin is somebody's idea of how to game the system. Bitcoin has no legitimate need. What you're basically saying is you want to create an economic situation based on Bitcoin or some other coin, or digital coin that has no foundation whatsoever. I don't need to know how much money Leo has in the bank. I don't need to know how Leo is spending his money. For a few smart people who figured this out and said, okay, I can create Bitcoin and I can sell Bitcoin. And the thing about Bitcoin is it's fluctuating between 30 and 40 and 50 and 100 and $200,000 or $400,000 a day. That means that it has no structure. They're using Bitcoin in places like Mexico and places like that. So, but look at last time I was in Mexico, the peso was 8 to 1 to $1. So I mean, the whole idea, basically, if you try, basically, Bitcoin is Leo creating his own money.
Absolutely, and I could do that.
Exactly, that's what you're doing.
I can make Leo coins.
That's my point. The Bitcoin is Leo creating his own money. It's like, what's the value of a Confederate dollar today? Zero.
Well, look,
You might like you to owe them some money.
well, look, what's the value of a U.S. dollar since it's not backed up by gold anymore?
But even in the world economy, it's still considered the world standard of exchange.
Of exchange.
And because it's still considered the world standard of exchange,
that gives it credibility.
That's why China is fighting us, because they want the yen to be the world standard of exchange. And that's why there are other countries that are fighting us, because they want their money to be the world standard. So the euro in Europe, they want that to be the world standard of exchange. As an American, I'm with the dollar.
Oh yeah,
and I'm gonna stay with the dollar. And I'm not investing any money in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
We've got about 2 minutes. We got about 2 minutes left, about a minute and a half.
So I'll tell you, when I was in Europe, right?
Mhm.
The euro is worth more, was worth more than the dollar.
It's down.
And when we went in the store and you'd say, I only have an American currency, they was like, go get some euros. We don't want that. So it's changed. But we got about 2 minutes.
We got about a minute now. And what I think one thing we need to do here is we need to go ahead and tell people how to contact you and me.
Absolutely. So they can contact me, Leo Woodbury, by either going to our website, newalphacdc.com, or you can also email me, leo@newalphacdc.com.
And you can contact me at the Community Times newspaper, Larry Smith, at dsmith7716@aol.com, or you can visit any of our 3 or 4 websites, starting with www.village-voices.com, or you can call us at 843-667-1818. That's 843-667-1818, and we will be able to answer any questions or any concerns that you may have.
Okay, so thank you very much for joining us for the Leo and Larry show, the show that helps you to know things you should know, and hopefully to go places you want to and need to go. So until next week.
Until next week, and please use that information to send us any questions or anything you might have that you would like to have us talk about or address in this particular show.
Absolutely.
It's about where you go. If you really want to know, it's the Leo Larry Show. It's about what you know. It's about where you go. If you really want to know, it's the Leo Larry Show.